And these had been written up, published and translated. And by the time Stoker was writing, people were going to Eastern Europe. The tourist industry was well and truly established. And Stoker really knew about this kind of strange edge of Europe.
The superstitions that Stoker harnessed in writing Dracula are still alive in the 21st century. In parts of Central Europe, fear of the undead remains chillingly real. In Marotino de Sus, a small village in southern Romania, relatives take care to seal fresh graves by circling around them with incense. Villagers bring the deceased food to ensure they have everything they need for the journey into the next world. But sometimes the ritual precautions aren't enough. In 2004, 5 men went to the village cemetery to exhume the corpse of a man called Petre Toma, who had died recently. Toma's niece, Mirela Marinescu, claimed he had become a Moroi, a Romanian word for the undead.
Da, eu îl vedeam în imaginație, mi se părea, deci umbra lui. Deci eu îl vedeam, deci și noaptea, deci să spui toți vecinii cum veneau și că uite a fost și nora dânsului, deci multă lume. Deci cum o vedeam, deci și aveam așa, tremuram, deci...
Mirela believed that the Moroi would kill her, so her husband asked farmer Ion Ionescu to help him in destroying the creature.
Hai să-l dezgropăm, că e făcut moroi și că nevastă mea moare, Mirela. Înțelegi dumneavoastră? Să mergem la cimitir. Dom'le, era un îngheț puternic de tot, puternic. Dar puternic, nu așa. Deci când am cu târnăcopul, să sărea scânteii din târnăcop în gheața aia. Când am de-am spart gheața la cimitir. Da, în rest, sângele era proaspăt, de aici așa, de la încheietura gurii până la ureche, aici, în partea asta.
It's chillingly similar to the story of the Stapenhill vampires in England, recorded almost 1,000 years ago.
Mi-a băgat cuțitul și l-a despintecat de aici, așa, de la, scuzați-mă, nu știu cum să mă exprim, până aici, așa. Ba, morăi de dor, bă. Zicem vecinul meu, dacă a sărit din groapă, de nu mai fi de aici cu pușca prin cimitir de frică. Bine.
The villagers were going to destroy the Moroi by cutting out the dead man's heart. On the first night, they couldn't find it, so they went back a second time. This time, they succeeded. They collected straw and dried corn husks to make a fire.
Și așa zicea că se arde la răscruci. Am pus cocinea jos, pai, le-am dat foc și inima s-a luat în furcă, ca așa să luam în furcă, cea că să nu pui mâna pe ea. Am luat-o în furcă și când am pus-o acolo, domnule, și i-a făcut focul ăla, flacăra aia, știi cum părăia?
Petre Toma's daughter complained about the desecration of her father's body. The story went global.
Even for Romanians who are born in towns who don't know these practices, when the whole story pumped out in the media, it was a very, very bad feeling that it was a scandal. Look here, how primitive we can be. How come? So, what will say the strangers, Europeans, when hearing this kind of primitive practices?
The police were asked to investigate the desecration of Petre Toma's corpse. But in most cases, these strange rituals are not reported to the authorities or anyone else.
in such remote and isolated villages like Marotino is, with people very old living in the community. Such rituals are very well preserved, and they are carried out in order to let's say, protect somehow the community from such events like returning from dead can be. So you can still find it in remote rural communities, not only in Romania, but in the whole Balkan area, for example, in Serbia or in Bulgaria, where it's something that people still do.
The beliefs in 21st century Romania seem identical to the fears in medieval England almost 1,000 years ago.
It is quite amazing the level of continuity that we can see in these beliefs in Europe across a very broad time span. And I think it shows that, you know, people feel not everything can be explained rationally. There is still space, even in modern society, for fear and superstition.
This deep-seated terror of the undead has lasted at least 1,000 years, from the Middle Ages to the present day. In Part 4, we'll discover the origins of these fears. The archaeologists investigating the deviant burials found at Kiltitian are waiting for the results of carbon-14 dates, which will tell them when these individuals died. Chris Reed is on his way to the lab to get the results.
It's one of the treats for us archaeologists to actually get a date back. Because I suppose more than any other sort of bit of analysis, it allows us to do what we're supposed to do, which is put the site in some kind of chronological order. My own feelings is that it's early rather than later medieval, somewhere in the 8th, 9th century. That would be what I would be thinking, and I like being right, so I hope that's what it is.
It will be remarkable if Chris can trace this fear of the vampire dead back several centuries before the earliest medieval accounts. Two weeks after the samples were taken from the deviant burials, the carbon-14 dates are now in.
The results were actually emailed to me last night from the company in Miami, and so just gonna have a look here. Right, okay. It looks like both of the burials date to anywhere from the late 7th century to the 9th century, and both of the dates seem to overlap in the middle of the 8th century. So anywhere from about 720 to 750, 760.
So the Irish skeletons with the stones in their mouths were buried at least 300 years before the stories of the undead in England. Remarkably, there are records from the same period suggesting that the fear of revenants and vampires was common.
One of the fascinating things about the dating of those burials is that they fit very well with the Irish penitential texts that were written in that period. So we've got one of these penitential texts from probably the 7th or 8th centuries. It's called the First Synod of St. Patrick. And one of the things it describes in there is about the fear of the living dead. So it says that anybody who believes in vampires should be put outside the church. What that actually shows was that there was a lot of people who believed in something like vampires in Ireland. This is a fascinating example of where you've got archaeology matching up very well with our historical sources.
But why would this fear have been so powerful in this period? John Blair believes that the arrival of Christianity may have triggered a wave of phobia.
Anthropologists have shown that when old established belief systems get disrupted by the appearance of monotheism, by Christianity or Islam or Buddhism, that very often they can take curious forms. Now, an obvious possible context for that would be 7th century England, with the conversion of the kings and then the kingdoms to Christianity between about 600 and about 660. And it is very interesting that a lot of the deviant burials come from that period. And so it may be that a heightened sense of fear at certain categories of people who may be seen to be a threat after their deaths is something that comes when Christianity undercuts the old beliefs and people are unsure what they should believe in.
Those fears seem to have driven people to treat the Kiltetian skeletons with extreme brutality. In the same way, in modern Romania, cutting the heart out from a dead relative might seem to be a barbaric act. But there is another way of understanding these rituals. In Romania, they are seen as helping the Moroi.
A dead has to be dead, not undead or half dead. So they are doing him something good, not something bad. So it's about universal cosmic harmony. So the dead with the dead, the alive with the alive. So for the community it's very good, for the dead it's very good. So where is the harm for them?
Slaying a Moroi stops him from being trapped between this world and the next. It literally saves him from a fate worse than death.
Am școală de sudor electric profesional făcut, am școală de panaturi, radio, televizoare, am făcut. Deci nu sunt ultima spiță, mă credeți, dar eu vă spui adevărul în față, dacă mă înțelegeți. Dumneavoastră puteți să le traduceți la oameni.
It's extraordinary how this modern folklore could be the key to understanding a deep-rooted fear that can never be explained by archaeology and science alone.
Archaeologists always, as it were, have been very reluctant to use folklore, folkloric traditions as a way of explaining ideas in the past. They think, well, they may have been reinvented in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. Can we really get into the medieval mind? I mean, I think there's often a lot of truth behind these folklore stories. I'm sure that as more examples are published, archaeologists will become sensitized that actually when they find stones in burials or they find nails in aberrant places and so forth, they will begin to say, maybe that's a revenant burial, and publish it. And so hopefully as awareness increases, so we'll begin to recognize that actually it wasn't a very rare thing, but actually really quite common in the Middle Ages.
For archaeologist Chris Reed, the deviant burials have enriched his understanding of Ireland's mysterious medieval past.
The stone and mouth skeletons, when they were first discovered, none of us really understood the potential importance of them or significance in the wider scheme. But as time has gone on, we've all realized just how special they actually are and how unique within an Irish context.
Farmer John Burke owns the land at Kiltetian, where the skeletons were found. He believes that whatever the reasons for these strange burials, the bodies should now be returned to their graves and left to rest in peace.
It's a strange thing, but my dad would always have said this was a very peaceful place. For me, it's a sacred place, and it will always be a sacred place, with no particular fear or thoughts or otherwise. And in a way, I feel almost in a way responsible or a duty bound to respect the people who are buried there. Those people, they weren't brought from anywhere else. They're the local people's ancestors. And I respect that. And I think we're privileged to have this kind of site on our land.
Next week's Revealed will leave you truly astounded as we unravel the reasons behind America's planned war on Britain. Catch that next Tuesday at 8. Next tonight, though, the war is on their streets in new CSI Miami.